Documentaries are about the people that you meet and the stories you can tell. Stories of tragedy, laughter, hope and desperation, across faraway lands or right here in your own backyard. This podcast brings these stories to you, the listener, so that you can experience the adventures of documentary filmmaking in audio form while embarking on daily adventures of your own. Welcome to Barefoot Media's Stories Within Stories podcast with your host, Simon Holland. Hannah Fitzhardinge is the current Mayor of Fremantle and responsible for overseeing the growth and accessibility of one of the best cities on the planet. Hannah is a passionate advocate for the arts and culture and has been working tirelessly to link together government and industry with art and culture to form a fascinating urban hub of talent and ideas. We truly live in a remarkable place, and the feeling is the best is yet to come, which is in part due to Hannah's leadership, optimism and efforts. So if you've ever wondered what it's like to be the mayor, or perhaps one day you'd like to be the mayor yourself, this episode is for you. Welcome to the podcast, Her Majesty Hannah Fitzhardinge.
I'm pretty sure that's not my title, but thank you, Simon.
That's not the official title for a mayor?
Afraid not.
So what was the impetus for becoming mayor?
Look, it's an interesting story for me because I don't think I ever really had a strong desire to be a mayor. But I've always had a desire to get stuff done, and I've always had a commitment to public service. And I take it back to when I worked for Jeff Gallop, former Premier, and I worked for him when he was Leader of the Opposition as well. And, you know, in a way, he was the last of the good guys, and I don't reflect negatively on anyone who goes into public life. But, you know, here's a guy with a PhD in political science who reads extensively, who thinks about everything, and who becomes Premier of Western Australia. And for me, it was so inspiring to see the application of good policy. You know, it was a time of ending logging in old growth forests and things, really complicated, difficult decision making. And I found that inspiring, and particularly in the service of public good. So I've always had a bit of a fascination with that. And I'd been on council for a while, and Brad Pettit was moving to the upper house, and I don't know, it just seemed like the time was right.
I have a feeling that people intend to go into politics to make massive change, and they get caught up in the mechanics of being a politician. Did you have an idea of what you wanted to do when you got into the office?
I mean, yes and no. I'd been on council for a period of time and probably long enough to know that, you know, we talk about this analogy when you get elected to council of just standing under the waterfall, because there is so much incoming stuff. You just spend a lot of time dealing with things that you didn't think you'd be considering. It kind of flows onto the top of your head, and you have to read a lot of things and make a lot of decisions that probably were nothing to do with why you ran for council in the first place. So, you know, you kind of need to find your way out from under the waterfall and think, what is it that I was hoping to do while I was here? And that can take really even a couple of years for newly elected people to get there. So did I have an idea of what I wanted to do? There were some key signals, I guess, for me. We needed to renew our strategic community plan, and that's a really big opportunity to talk to people about how do you feel Freo's going. And broadly speaking, I think people are pretty happy with how Freo's going. There's a sense of community. There's a sense of inclusivity, of wanting to make sure there's a place for everyone. There's a real sense of, I think innovation, it's such an overused word, but let's do things differently. Let's find new industries. Let's just take this little idea and see where we can run with it. Probably one of the big issues that came out of that we knew about, but just hearing the sentiment from the community was quite, you know, it put a burden in a sense on us to do something about it, was housing. You know, so we all know there's a housing crisis, but one of the big challenges for us is that Fremantle's identity is so linked with diversity. You know, it's a place you can go where everyone's welcome, and that there's, you know, people on the street who you're not going to see at, you know, insert suburban shopping centre here, and creatives and art and culture and music. But we're so short of places for people to live that everyone's getting pushed out.
Yeah.
And there's a whole generation, it seems now, of people who say, look, I've grown up in Freo, but I can't ever see myself being able to own property here or even rent. And that's really come out now as a key focus area where we've gone, well, we need to do something about that and we need to move as quickly as we can.
I see a lot of places in the world, you see art and culture really flourish, but it's something that doesn't earn a lot of money. And so you really risk losing the beating heart of Freo if the artists have to leave to go somewhere where they can live.
Yeah.
That's a real trick to that balance, isn't it?
It really is. And it's about quantity of supply of housing. It's also about diversity of supply of housing, different ownership models, whether that's everything from housing cooperatives through to build to rent. Student housing is a part of the mix that we're completely missing at the moment. So, yeah, it's a complicated puzzle.
Now, you took over during COVID, right? So that was a really strange time in Freo, just being here myself, and looking around, all the empty shops boarded up, anything that was sort of like maybe just surviving went under. And then the baffling success story of the Pickled Ferry, which managed to navigate seamlessly through all of that. I don't know how they did that. But what was it like when you took the office and you had a look at the state of things at that time?
Yeah, it was such a period of high anxiety, wasn't it? And it was for us at council as well. It was interesting for me because I'm also a director at a small business leadership development company, and we'd had JobKeeper and all these kind of things to keep the business running, whereas at council we didn't get JobKeeper. We were giving rent relief to all of our tenants. It was a pretty bad time to be running a city, to be honest. And all those aspirations as well that we had as a council kind of had to go on ice for a period of time where we just navigated through the challenges of COVID. It was a difficult time, I think, for our community as well. A lot of fear and anxiety, the sort of division coming up between different people's attitudes. The biggest thing for us was, what's the best pathway to keep our city economically alive? And I know we say, that's focusing on the economics and there's people's lives, but the economics is people's lives. These are businesses that families, individuals have spent so much time working to create. And, if the streets are empty, they only have a limited number of days until cash flow, it's always king and it's also the killer. So it was really about how do we keep Freo's sort of heart pumping during that period of time. And we recognise how fortunate we were here in Western Australia as well when you compare to Victoria and to other countries.
Now, I've seen you participating in Freo events, which is kind of like a really important thing. I think a lot of people think someone like the Mayor might live in Subi, but then drive a Lexus down to Fremantle and make decisions on behalf of the community. But that's not really the case at all. You're really, boots on the ground approach to this, aren't you?
Yeah, look, this is my hometown, and it's a funny thing being the mayor because there was a great thing I think Griffin Longley said to Brad Pettit when he was mayor. He said something like, it must be like doing surgery on your lover, which is just such a great line because you get to know it far too well in ways that you don't really want to. Every planning decision you make, somebody's happy and somebody is unhappy. So you're in this constant kind of high level of detail. I walk around, you should see my phone, the photos on my phone are, people, nice things happening, footpath, pothole, sign,
Yeah.
Because you do become really intimately involved with your city. And, being involved in events is just part of it for me. It's kind of, the busyness of the job is hard because I'd love to spend a lot more time. I love writing. I love sitting and having coffee with people and just hearing their stories in a cafe. And then it's, that's the stuff I love. A lot of the time I'm going meeting.
Yeah.
And that's how it is. So
do you get a lot of people, I guess you're a focal point for a lot of people. Do you always get people knocking on your doors saying, we need this, we need that, and you've got limited resources to do that with?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's sometimes it's heartbreaking because people email you with these really difficult problems, but you've got literally no powers to solve them. So sometimes it's just all we can offer is empathy. But there is a lot that comes through our door, and we try and deal with it every day. I've got one assistant who works with me in my office, and it's like a train station with the amount of correspondence and people and everything else that comes through.
Yeah,
it's a lot going on.
And what would you like the city to look like in the future, say the near future, let's say 2030, after you've had your chance to stamp your authority on it?
Well, I'll correct the authority in terms of I really am only one vote on council. So I have a sort of figurehead role, and I can work closer with the administration day to day than other elected members do. But at the end of the day, I don't have a huge amount of formal authority. I can make citizens on behalf of the Australian government, which is a lovely thing to do, but ultimately not so powerful.
Yeah.
So in 2030, I mean, there's a bunch of factors, I think, that would be going on around then. It's 200 years since the first arrival of colonial, the colonial arrival of the Swan River colony here at Fremantle. So 2029 is going to be a really interesting year because, I think we're probably past the point where, we reenact tall ships arriving.
Yeah.
There's a...
That changed really quickly, didn't it?
Yeah, there's a whole sort of conversation to be had about what does 2029 look like in terms of acknowledging the short history, but also the long history of Fremantle, Mangaree or Arthur Head, where that, sort of arrival happened. What do we want to do there to acknowledge that date, and how do we create a lasting legacy? And this is very much a live conversation for us at Council at the moment. How do we create a long-term legacy of benefit for Aboriginal people, and particularly Whadjuk Noongar people at Mangaree? So that's one example of sort of...
Without the corporate feeling of it, right? You want it to be as authentic as possible.
Yeah, that's right. And First Nations first. We've got to work that out with Whadjuk Noongar people and their decision-making structures. And yeah, so I mean, that's a sort of a lovely opportunity to work on.
Fremantle's always been the leader of that though, right? Like, I feel like if you're looking at the bastion of Western Australia or Perth or even Australia to some degree, it's probably maybe Melbourne to a point, but then Fremantle is the leader that just says, we're making this change, we're doing this.
Yeah, look, I think we've got a lovely relationship with Aboriginal people that's built over sort of the work of probably decades and decades of work. We've been working on reconciliation since the 80s at Council, so it's, coming on 40 years. But even things like Fremantle Oval, we know, is a place where Aboriginal people have always felt welcomed, and we've had this incredible history with South Fremantle Football Club of these incredible Indigenous players. And, so there are places, and even when there was a curfew in Fremantle and Aboriginal people weren't allowed here after a certain time of night, during the day they felt welcome here. So, I hear these stories and I think, gosh, there's a kind of a responsibility you have in this role to carry on that work and what that looks like next. We're focusing on truth-telling. Our new RAP plan has a sort of a line in there about treaty and exploring that. So, yeah, it's a continued piece of work.
And you're right about being an eclectic city because I sort of think when you look at our coffee culture and the food culture, I mean, you're not getting anywhere without immigration here. We're not eating, we didn't grow up eating Roma pasta for $6, all you can eat pasta, just those kind of things, or drinking at Gino's coffee. You're not getting that if you didn't have immigration, waves of immigration.
Absolutely. We've got to embrace our story as a port city and all of the people who've come here. And the first arrival for so many migrants to Australia was Fremantle. That was the first sights and smells and everything that greeted them was Fremantle. So it is a really, really special place. But coming back to your question about 2030, the other bit is this sort of question, I alluded to it with the housing, but population is another challenge for us. So, you speak to Italians who grew up in Freo and lived in, Norfolk Street or Suffolk Street or one of those streets there, and there'd be 7 or 8 people living in one of those little cottages.
Yeah.
Now across the whole of the CBD, we have less than 2,000 people. And that's at a historic low for Fremantle.
Yeah.
So while we love all our visitors and the tourist economy and hospitality and all of that, that sort of, it doesn't give you that 24/7 footfall that you kind of need to create a really, truly vibrant city. So we are really focused on increasing that number. And, we've got a really ambitious goal of 10,000 people sort of living between here and the new bridge when it's